Johnny's on mute. Johnny, we want Johnny and Nick on.
Oh yeah, you must have.
I'm unmuted. I can hear you.
So,
Yeah, and you can hear me. Everybody can hear me.
Nick, I think, are you on mute? I think at the moment.
Would you put me on gallery, please?
I'm sorry.
Can you put me on gallery?
put one gallery?
Okay, it doesn't matter. Leave it.
Oh, Irene started screen sharing. Should you ask Irene?
Irene, you're screen sharing.
Irene?
I haven't touched anything.
Unless there's another Irene, it might not be you. There are two Irenes.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Okay, it's done.
I know it was me.
Okay, I think that we're ready to go, everybody. Sorry about.
Leave it like that, then I'll unpin us afterwards.
Okay, sorry about all.
Irene screen sharing again.
It's not. Might be the other Irene. Don't think it's Irene Mansfield. I think there's another Irene. Okay.
Wait a minute. Advanced sharing office.
It's fine. It's fine now.
Participants at a time.
Fine.
Yeah, there we are.
Okay, fine. Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Sorry about those technical hiccups, but welcome everyone to Muswell Hill, top of the hill. And the first thing is just a housekeeping matter. Joe, yes, I think you started recording. We are recording this session. So if anyone doesn't want to be seen on the recording, just turn off your video. But don't turn off everybody else's, please. Okay, so today we're having a different format from how we usually do things. We're actually going to have, our speaker is going to be asked questions today instead of the usual just having a speaker. And the questions are going to be asked actually by my brother, Johnny Levy. Now, I have to say that the story is, and I only know this is what my mum used to tell me, that Johnny and Nick started school when they were 10, which was many years ago, and I won't say how long, but it was at least half a century. And they hung their coats up on the peg, and Nick was Nick Lander, and Johnny was Johnny Levy, and the rest is history. They've been lifelong friends, and I think they still are. Is that right, lads?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's wonderful that you're both here today. We're looking forward, Nick, to hearing about 40 years of restaurants. And Johnny, we're over to you, and you can do the questioning.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. I was particularly flattered when Janet asked me if I would do a Q&A with Nick once, yeah, you can all hear me, once she'd asked Nick to come and talk. And as Janet said, my relationship with Nick goes back a long time, when we were at school together in Manchester. And then Nick's always been a pioneer, as you will hear during the course of this afternoon, and he came to London. And once he came to London, the rest of us followed. And we've lived near each other in London since we've been here. Our kids have become friendly, our parents were friendly. So the history goes back a long way through the two families. So it's particularly lovely for me to be able to do this today. I'm not going to spend too much time telling you much about Nick's background, because I think that was Janet set that down beforehand. And I think what people really want to do is to hear from Nick about his life in the restaurant world. Just by quick way of background, after Manchester Grammar, Nick went to Cambridge, where he studied history, then went to the Manchester Business School, spent a period working in textiles, and then as a commodity trader in London, and then found himself in the world of restaurants and as a journalist, as a book writer, as a consultant, much of which we'll cover in the next hour. As regards questions, Janet didn't mention it, but I suspect maybe the best thing is if people have got questions and the big time at the end, they put that into the chat room, and then we can ask people to ask the questions. So I suppose what's always intrigued me, Nick, was given your background that was sort of history, commodity trading, textiles, what was it that got you started in the whole world of restaurants?
Well, I think part of it has to do with religion and a love of eating my mother's food and your mother's food in particular. And I just think the idea was very simply drilled into me from an early age that life revolved around the family table. And that was something that I think I wanted to carry on. How I actually made the move was slightly more dramatic. My father had a series of strokes in early 1980, and I left London to help him get better. And I realized I was then 28. I didn't have a mortgage. I had owned our own house, and it was time to take a risk. And I saw in the Financial Times an advert for a company that was looking for an importer of its California wines into the UK. And I thought that sounded like a nice thing to do. And I started importing some California wine and realized there was absolutely no money to be made in it, because whatever little profit there was went in margin or in samples. So I realized pretty quickly that I had to find another way. And I thought a little wine bar or something there where I could make a decent profit and sell some food and be a nice beer mensch and so on would be a rather good way of running a business. And we have a friend called Tom Brent, who is a lovely guy. He's had an interest in a lot of interesting properties. And I asked him to find somewhere for me. And he found L'Escargot in Greek Street. And that was the beginning of a romance that took me into restaurants and then into journalism.
In fact, I see that Tom is on the call as well. So listening in. Hello, Tom. So going back though to you, because you were brought up, as we all were, in very sort of traditional Jewish families where it was the mother who did all the cooking, irrespective of whether she went out to work or not. And my memory of your household is very similar to ours, that it was our mums that did all the cooking. I think your father had one signature dish, if I remember.
Yes, on Sunday night.
She boasted about. But it wasn't a culture that we were brought up in where men, you were a pioneer in that, because today, of course, it's a very different world we all live in, as we'll come on to talk about in relation to Will maybe later, your son.
Yes, but my father had spent the war in the Air Force. And I realized this only after he died, but he was served, I think, on more than one occasion, what he often assumed was going to be his last meal before he went flying. And it left him with an extraordinarily modern attitude to life and to going out and enjoying himself and to making the most of things. And so restaurant going for our family was always a part. I mean, didn't do it very often, but it was always a very distinctive part. And it was always led by my father. And I think that whetted my appetite as well.
Right. So the wine sort of drew you into the wine bar, but then, so the opportunity.
And into marriage, Johnny.
We're going to come on to that. There was a lot to be. Wine plays a very big part in your life as well, as we'll come on to. But going back to L'Escargot, I mean, L'Escargot was an iconic establishment. It was, I mean, I remember, in fact, how it ended up on the news, which I think in those days was at 9 o'clock. The headlines was at the time of Clive Ponting and the Official Secrets Act, and he'd just been found not guilty, and he'd gone to celebrate, I think it was with Michael Heseltine, and they arrived and the news started. You couldn't have bought coverage like that with them outside L'Escargot. Yeah. So tell us a bit about then your period at L'Escargot.
Well, getting started was very, very fraught. It was a 5-story building with lots and lots of stairs, and it had the kitchen in the basement, which was reached to the ground floor by a manual lift, and then to the first and second floors by 2 electric lifts, which always broke down. But our timing was terrific, because it was the middle of a recession, and so this was good news for everybody. But also it was at a time when Channel 4 had just started in Charlotte Street. And of course, Channel 4 outsourced everything. It was just administrative offices they had. And And so they gave a huge kickstart to all the professions that they needed, most of which were based in Soho. And Soho was where Lescard was. And so people used to come for lunch, for dinner. And it was a terrific time to be a restaurateur because very few places were opening.
But Lescard was a big restaurant. I mean, some people might have thought, well, I might start off my restaurant life with a small little cafe or something and learn some of the tricks of the trade. But you went straight in at the deep end. I mean, it was a big establishment where, in lots of ways, you hadn't worked in that world beforehand. So it was all new to you.
Yes, but there were a lot of good people who I could hire. There were some pretty awful people who I made the mistake of hiring as well. But they all, I think, liked me. They liked the fact that it was personal. The fact that I was borrowed up to the limits, I think also probably appealed to them as well. You know, they thought, we can only help this guy succeed. And it was tough, but it worked.
And presumably, given...
If I'd been any older, I wouldn't have done it. If I'd met Jancis a year afterwards and our first daughter had been born, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Mm. But given his position in Soho and everything, presumably you had lots of famous people, lots of characters who came through your doors.
We had Princess Diana one night. We had Mick Jagger one lunchtime. And I remember the waitress saying to me after he'd ordered a cup of tea, she said to me, "You are not getting his cup back. I'm keeping it because it's had his lips on it." That was very funny. And we had a lot of, and Eleanor Salvoni, who ran the restaurant, used to write VIP. And Martin Lamb, who was the chef, used to say, "God, I don't know how many VIPs we're going to get in tonight," because everybody, as far as she was concerned, was a VIP. We got a lot of people, Melvin Bragg. There were just because there weren't many places to go then. And the thing that I'm most proud of, I think, was that we were the first restaurant in London, certainly the first ambitious restaurant to write our menu in English.
Is that right?
Yeah. Until then, everybody had written their menu in French or Italian. But we decided we'd write it in English, and that was something I was very proud of.
And it was around that time that you met Jancis.
Yeah. It was actually at the American Embassy, because she was then secretary of something called the Zinfandel Club, which had been set up by Hugh Johnson and Harry Waugh to increase the appreciation of California wines. And she asked me for some samples, which I delivered to her. And then when my agent from California was coming over, he said to me, "I'm a big shot in inverted commas. I'd like to meet a journalist for dinner." I couldn't think of anybody I'd rather have had dinner with than Jancis. So we had dinner in November 1980, and we were married within a year.
That's lovely story.
Mm.
So if we go back then to your period at L'Escargot, you owned L'Escargot for about 9 years. 9 years, and then you sold.
Mm-hmm.
And why did you then sell what
because
was then an incredibly successful restaurant?
I have had this problem with my gut since I was 16. And I collapsed in 85 and had a major operation. And then I was back in hospital in 87, by which time we had 2 children. And I realized it was either the restaurant or my family, and there was no choice. And so I decided to sell it.
Which in fact, with hindsight, was quite fortuitous as well, because it was just before
the crash of early 90s, yeah.
And there were all of us thinking, God, he's a genius. He's got this foresight into the economy, which all of us could do with. So after L'Escargot, then you had to make a decision what you were going to do next.
Yeah.
And then, as we all know, you then went into journalism. But how did that all come about?
Well, again, that was thanks to Jancis. She had just started preliminary work on the first edition of the Oxford Companion to Wine, which is this enormous tome. And that would involve a lot of contributions from around the world, because in those days, this is before email, before the internet, she relied on people on the ground who would send in faxed reports. So the office, which was next door to the bedroom, was, you'd go in the morning and there were pages and pages and pages of faxed. And two of the contributors were actually a married couple from South Africa who were coming for dinner to our house. And we asked them who they would like to meet over our dinner table. And he replied with the name of the guy who was the weekend editor at the FT, called JDF Jones, who'd spent quite a long time in South Africa himself. And over the course of dinner, I asked JDF why there was not a regular restaurant column in the Financial Times, the weekend section. And he said, well, it's because we've never really met anybody who combines business with restaurants and can write, and so on and so on and so on. And a few weeks later, we went out for dinner to a restaurant, and it inspired me to write an article, which I sent to JDF. And he phoned me up and said, it's going in a week on Saturday. How about every fortnight thereafter? And I remember him saying, the only thing you have to decide is whether you want to be known as Nick Lander or Nicholas Lander. And I decided on the latter, and I think it was the best decision, one of the best decisions I ever made.
Except you're still Nick to many of us.
Exactly, yeah.
And of course, it was whilst you were at the FT that you were then very instrumental in that offer, which went on for I'm not sure how many years, lunch for a fiver, which became, I mean, everybody would rush to get their FT at the beginning of the year to work out where we were going to get our.
But that was borrowed from something that had happened in America the August beforehand, when they were having the Democratic convention in a city which I can't remember, but Clinton had already got the nomination, so there were not many nominees coming to the city, so the restaurants were going to be empty, and they started a lunch promotion. And that was something I read about and went to my editor, and he said, well, if it's going to work, it's got to be lunch for a fiver, which even in those days, in '93, asking restaurateurs to put on 2 courses for a fiver was asking a lot of them. But we got 150 and it worked.
And a lot of us got a lot of pleasure from it.
Exactly, yeah.
So how many years now is it at the FT?
Just over 30.
And what have been the sort of moments you'll remember, sort of particular articles that have sort of captured the zeitgeist at the time? Because I should say it's a mixture, hasn't it? It's not just been reviews of restaurants. You've written about restaurants, about the business of restaurants. The cloakrooms, the problems of cloakrooms, or the problems of how you get the food from the kitchen to the table, and been lots of changes over that period of 30 years in terms of how restaurants now do their business.
Yeah, one of the editors I've had, and I don't know how many there have been, came up with the title of The Restaurant Insider, and that has been my strapline ever since. And I think that has given me great license to roam wherever I like. So if I see a subject, or, I know those ones behind the scenes really appeal to you, Johnny, but there are others more perhaps focused on actually what the kitchen can cook. What are the biggest changes? I've seen so many, but I think the most fundamental is how far less formal restaurants have become, not just in dress, but just in their whole approach to how they serve the food and the wine. How much more relaxed, I look at a photo of myself as a restaurateur in the 1980s, and I'm wearing a shirt, tie, suit, black shoes, and I'm clean shaven. I look at our son, and he's very, very successful as a restaurateur, far more successful than I ever was. And he wears jeans, a belt. You can see the top of his bottom when he bends down, vest, and a shirt. Nobody quibbles with him at all.
Yeah, we'll come on to Will in a second because that's an interesting topic as well. But before I do, just jumping forward, when we're talking about the changes that you've seen, given what's happened over the last year, and we've lived through this pandemic, and unfortunately restaurants have probably been the most affected amongst in our economy. What are the changes that you think will have come about through that year that might carry forward once everything reopens?
I think there's going to be a lot of closures. That's just a very, very unfortunate state of affairs. I think a lot of chefs might decide to leave, and there'll be a huge turnover. But that's a good. I'm never afraid of changes at the top because it just means that there's more places for people to fulfill with ambition. I think there's going to be a huge upsurge in, I don't know how everybody feels in the audience, but somebody said it's going to be like the roaring 20s, when people will go out. And I think the restaurateurs, the chefs who have adapted over the last year will have to adapt as well again to please customers. But I think there's huge enthusiasm out there for serving customers, for cooking for customers again. I think it's going to be a good time.
One of the successes of the last 12 months have been, particularly, I think, amongst the young restaurateurs who've been able to adapt very quickly. The home cooking, for example, the home delivery. And that presumably is something that will probably continue afterwards, in addition to obviously being people able to go back into restaurants.
Yeah, I think that actually that will slightly depend on the weather, because and also how quickly restaurants can adapt and accept everybody who wants to come and eat. Because I gather that the home delivery side is slightly tailing off now. It was fantastic during the winter, but now that spring is here, I think that side will tail off a little bit, and it might come back again next winter. You never know, as to supplement going out. I just don't know. My crystal ball isn't that polished, I'm afraid, Johnny.
So let's talk a little bit about Will. So for everybody's benefit, Will is Nick's son, and Will went and studied history at Oxford, like his dad. Then Nick was at Cambridge, and then Will had a very brief foray into the city, and then he decided he wanted to go into the restaurant world. So, tell us about when he first told you. What was your initial and Jancis's initial reaction to that? Well,
he would make a very good spy, Will. I have to say that about him, because he wasn't very open about. He had some tutoring work, and then he was working for Vinoteca, and it was only gradually that we realized that he wanted to be a restaurateur. And then we put him in touch with a friend of ours, Niece, who had lots and lots of restaurant experience and was looking to open on her own. And we introduced them, and they got on very well. And then one day I got an email from Will saying, we've just looked at this very, very strange restaurant. We can't work it out at all. And it was called Meatballs at the Quality Chop House. And I said, is this the Quality Chop House on Farringdon Road? And he said, yes. I said, well, I reviewed it in 1992, I think, or possibly 93. And I sent him the review, and it was a phenomenal restaurant in those days. But it had fallen into the hands of somebody who had a meatballs franchise and thought it would make a suitable venue. And he had neglected it, and there was dust everywhere. But all it needed was a good lick and a bit of polish. It reminded me of L'Escargot in certain respects, and it's been a great place ever since.
Yes, so he started with Quality Chop House, and then not long afterwards, he opened Portland, which is in Great Portland Street, and then Clipstone in Clipstone Street, both very close to each other. Portland, I'm right in saying, got 1 star within a year of opening. So it must, I mean, would Will come and talk to you about when he was going to look at someone new?
Yes and no. As I said, he likes to play his cards close to his chest, and he knows that I don't think I'm too enthusiastic, but I'm quite enthusiastic for him. And he'd come and talk to me possibly when he'd seen the site. I didn't know anything about Portland, but I knew about Clipstone, for example. And he's been a pretty good judge so far.
I mean, certainly anybody who is listening here, who is in London or coming to London, if you've not been to any of these establishments, then you must. They're all wonderful, all very different. And what about Will in relation to wine? Having a mother who's the leading wine writer and expert in this country, would he ask Jancis about wine?
Yes. Oh, he's very deferential to Jancis. Yeah. No, I mean, quite rightly, because I mean, I think in a way that's the big difference between food and wine. You know, everybody is a food expert, but most people, I think, even in the audience here, would say, I know what I like about wine, but I don't know that much.
But of course, you know a lot of also, not just about writing about restaurants, but also you become a restaurant consultant, or consultant not just to restaurants, to art establishments, where they would come to you early on, realizing, I mean, if we take places like Tate or the Royal Opera House or wherever, they realize it's not just about performance, it's about the total experience, and part of that total experience is the restaurant.
Well,
how important that is.
Interrupt you, because I think "was" is the adjective, is the verb. You know, because I think for a lot of these institutions now, they're very worried that once the COVID restrictions are lifted, people will come for the performance and that's it. They won't come, to get anything to eat or drink before, during, or after the meal. They'll come in, they'll watch the performance, and then they'll leave. And what this is going to do to their finances, I shudder to think, but,
Why do they feel that, given that people are all wanting to go to restaurants at the moment? Why wouldn't you still want to go?
I don't know. I mean, I was just talking to the guy who used to run the hospitality at the Opera House, and that's the way they're thinking. I don't know. It may not be the case. It may be that after 6 months, people feel so confident that they'll go and spend as much time as they used to. But I just think there will be a marked change in how people, I mean, I don't know, maybe we need to ask the audience, how would they feel about going out to the Opera House? Would they go for the full gamut of everything it has to offer, or would they just go for the performance?
Yes, maybe that's somebody, people comment afterwards, or comment in the chat even. Doing so. So then you've done things like the King's Cross development or the South Bank development. So when they're looking at these big new multi-million-pound projects, again, they realize how important it is to get the right mix of restaurants, how to site those. And that's become another part of your portfolio.
Yeah. Well, that started again over in 91 when I met Nicholas Snowman, who was then the chief executive of the South Bank Centre. And he had lived in Paris for 10 years. And so his stomach, I always used to say, used to stop at 5 minutes to 1 o'clock and kind of register with his brain that he was hungry. And he was working at the South Bank, which at the time was a complete desert. There was nowhere you could get a decent cup of tea, cup of coffee, anything to eat. And so he called me in and showed me what became the People's Palace and then became Skylon. And then we redeveloped the cafe downstairs, which became Eat. And then we put a huge new building in, and that was all, the ground floor was hospitality. And then I was working on King's Cross St Pancras when that opened in 2008. And so we put in Le Pain Quotidien and the Champagne Bar. And then one of the owners of King's Cross St Pancras was London and Continental Railways, who owned the King's Cross site. And they brought me in here, and we started with Caravan 10 years ago. But my principle has always been that you need to start on the ground floor. You just need to get coffee, tea, sandwiches, the simple things right. Get those right, and then you can build on that. But if you don't get the basics right, you're stuck forever.
Good advice. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who owe their success in lots of ways to your encouragement. I'm thinking in particular of somewhere like Caravan, which was a small coffee house in Exmouth Market.
That's
and
right.
When the opportunity came along at King's Cross, St Pancras, and you almost had to push them out, if I remember correctly.
Well, King's Cross in those days was really awful. You know, it was still haunted by its past. I remember saying to somebody, I've got this great site, would you be interested? And they said, where is it? And I said, it's King's Cross, and they put the phone down. You know, that's what King's Cross was like 10 years ago. And it's taken off since then, I'm delighted to say. But the story of Caravan was down to their porridge, because the chief executive of Argent at the time was a guy called Roger Maidlin, and he was a terrific cyclist, and he would cycle in from Richmond, where he lived, and we would meet in the basement of Caravan at Exmouth Market, and he had used up all his energy on the cycle, and he just fell in love with Caravan's porridge, and that was the deciding factor in taking the risk, because it was a double-edged risk. You know, Caravan had one small site in Exmouth Market, and at the same time, Argent were asking quite a lot to take over a 4,500 square foot site on one floor, which, if it had gone the wrong way, would have looked pretty empty for a long time.
But I think it's testimony to you that there were these. They knew you, they trusted you, they knew that you had their interests in heart. And another side that I maybe can say to people is, because our younger son had a friend he was at Oxford with, and they shared a house, and he then decided he was going to go into coffee bars. And I can remember at the time how it was your helping hand that guided him. And without that, he would never have set up. And there are lots of stories like that, and that must give you
great
a lot of pleasure seeing the successes of people that have started off. And of course, it's now seen as a completely different world. I mean, people, I suppose when we all grew up, if you went to work set up a cafe or whatever, it was because maybe you couldn't make it anywhere else. Whereas today it's completely different, the whole world.
Absolutely,
And we've become incredibly good at it in the UK, it seems to me. In terms
and COVID episode has just shown how much we miss them, not just in terms of socially, but also financially. You know, their contribution to GDP. Yeah, it's very sad.
Yes, I mean, it's going to be very interesting to watch, to see what happens, and people coming back into and having the confidence, as we were saying earlier. So would you say being a restaurateur is a profession that will make you rich or happy, or neither?
I look back on the 80s when I was a restaurateur, and I think nothing other than my family has ever given me as much pleasure as seeing people coming in to the restaurant and then leaving a couple of hours later with enormous smiles on their faces. And I don't think there's any other profession that in which you can put a smile on a customer's face as quickly as that of a restaurateur. So I think it definitely makes you happy. Whether it makes you rich is just a matter of luck, timing, and the market, which I can't answer for, I don't think. But it's definitely a profession that can make people happy and give them an enormous amount of job satisfaction. And also a lot of knowledge, about food and wine. And also how difficult some people can be.
Let's talk also now just quickly about the books, because we mentioned, Lunch for a Fiver is slightly different, but apart from that, you've written 2 books, one of which was an Economist Book of the Year.
The Art of it.
Yes, and those were stories of different restaurateurs.
Well, that came about because I suddenly got an email from a very nice woman who was the commissioning editor at Phaidon, saying, "We love your columns. Do you think you have a book in you?" And I had wanted for ages to write this book about restaurateurs, who I believe are a different species of animal, of human being, from chefs. And very few people have written about restaurateurs in any depth. And so I replied immediately saying, "Yes, this is what I'd like to do. Here is the names of 20 restaurateurs I'd like to write about. And here's the title for the book, which is The Art of the Restaurateur." And she bought it. That was it.
And who in your lifetime have been the best restaurateurs, the most innovative, the most creative?
Well, there was a Parisian restaurateur called Jean-Claude Renard, who was old school, but wonderful, and had a restaurant called Taillevent in Paris, which had the most sensational menu, which was big format. It had the first courses and the main courses on the outside, the wine list in the middle, and the desserts and the cheeses and so on the back page. And I think it's he and my friend Danny Meyer, who you know, who has started Gramercy Tavern and Union Square Cafe and the Modern in New York. And I think those are the 2 I would put up at the very, very top of my profession.
What about Albert Adrià El Bulli?
Yes, although he's more of a chef than a restaurateur.
Right.
But he and what Ferran did was extraordinary. And, I remember going there in 96, 97, and with our children, who were about then 12, and they didn't want any of the fancy food. They just wanted spaghetti with pasta sauce. And I remember Julia saying it was the best pasta sauce she'd ever had. And she was an expert in pasta sauces by that stage. She was 12.
Am I right in saying that you also had to cook one night?
Yeah, that was wonderful. He came to talk to people about his book, and he came on a Sunday, and the people from Phaidon, who were also publishing him, said, "We need some help. We can't find a restaurant to take Ferran Adrià to on the Sunday night." And I said, "Well, why are you taking him to a restaurant? He can come to our place and I'll cook for him." And it was fortunate because it was just the beginning of the grouse season. And he was infatuated with game. So I cooked him game, and I have never forgotten that. One of the things about being a chef is that you become the most phenomenally, fantastically quick eater, because you have to grab food standing up, in between, any time, any place. And so I had cooked 8 grouse for Ferran and Jancis and myself and the 5 guests. And I served Ferran first. And by the time I sat down with the 8th grouse, he had already finished his grouse.
So you weren't nervous at all cooking for him?
No.
What can you do? That some of us are nervous cooking for you.
No, Johnny. No, I don't think so. I mean, what can you do? I think the whole point of saying, going in and saying I'm a restaurant reviewer, I don't think it cuts any ice any longer. I don't think there's much people can do. What can you do? Put a few extra mushrooms on the plate or something,
Do people know when you're coming in? If you're going to review?
No. You usually use Robinson name.
Right.
Booking.
Good. Well, I wonder if it's now time to just maybe open up and see if we've got some questions from those who are here. How do we do that, Janet? Do we have to
Okay,
unmute
I'll take
people?
over. I'll take over, Johnny, doing the questions. Or do you want to do the question? I mean, I'm happy to. Do you want to ask the questions then?
Yeah.
I'll start with one, Nick, if you don't
All
mind. And it's been wonderful hearing from you. I'm sure everyone will agree, but we'll thank you properly at the end.
Thank you.
In the Sunday paper this week, I read that restaurants are now going to start making charges beforehand, asking people to pay up front.
Yes. Well, that's been going on for quite a long time.
Not the
And
week.
it's partly because customers would make, especially on a Saturday night, but also on a Friday or Thursday, they'd make multiple bookings, meet up, decide which one they'd go to, and then forget to cancel. So as restaurants over the years have become smaller and more intimate, a lost table is a higher proportion of their potential takings than it used to be. We used to serve 400 customers at L'Escargot, which is a day. That's quite a lot. So if you lose 4 or 8, it's annoying, but it's a small percentage. If you can only serve 30 or 40, you lose 4, it's 10% of your takings. And it's not surprising to me that restaurants are doing this. It's annoying, but it's not surprising.
Okay, Johnny, do you want to take over then and look at the chat? So please, will you put any questions, all of you, into chat? There's a question, I think, from
There's one. Shall I read this out? There's one.
Yeah.
Unless it's from Irene Mansfield. Unless Irene wants to ask it herself.
Irene, unmute it, Irene. Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to ask whether, with all the rules surrounding kashrut, is it possible to have a fine dining kosher restaurant?
I was involved in JW3, where the decision was taken not to have meat. I'd say financially it's just impossible. I'm afraid. I think you would limit, your audience would be limited, your costs would be much higher, and I don't think there'd be the gross margin in it for anybody to survive.
Yes, it's not like America where there's a big
community, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I just say to you that every mother is also a very quick eater?
Yeah, same principle.
Yes.
Grab it while you can.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I don't know, sometimes people are not happy to go into chat or don't know how to use
Okay.
chat. If anyone wants to put their hand up, you can deal with it that way. Celia, did you want to? Celia. And Celia, I must tell you, Nick, Celia is herself a well-known local caterer and has spoken to us. So Celia, off you go.
Hello. It's been a really interesting conversation with you. What I wanted to say was, I think the reason that places like the Royal Opera House won't be able to sustain the restaurant is because if you have a choice in this economic situation that we're in, if you have a choice between going to the opera and eating a meal as well, people will choose the obviously the opera.
Yeah.
And because of the cost.
Yes. Yeah. No. I mean, I worked for the Opera House for 10 years. I know it is a very, very expensive operation.
Yeah.
And they need, the support that the financial support they got from hospitality was significant, but it wasn't particularly excessive. And it's more the convenience. You know, it's the idea that you can have a couple of courses before the dessert.
Yeah.
That's what they should be playing on, I think. But and also the problem is that their design of their restaurants is always 10 years behind what people want, you know, and so
Yes.
a lot of money has been spent on redesigning the restaurant, whereas actually it should have possibly gone elsewhere. But I think you're quite right, Celia.
And I'm the quickest eater in the world. My daughter says I eat on the run.
Thanks, Celia. Nick Clark.
Oh, hey, Nick. Thanks so much. That was so interesting to listen to.
Good.
I've got a company that I train people in hospitality.
Oh, right.
Restaurants like Brat, Kiln, Smoking Goat. But I'm just interested to get your take in like Danny Meyer's idea of hospitality being about how you make people feel.
Yeah.
What do you think are like the key traits for someone to deliver hospitality?
I think the first thing is a smile, then making people feel comfortable, knowledgeable. Danny has a very good phrase that actually a restaurant should be food that can't be cooked at home, but in an environment that feels like home. And I think that's really it, you know. Having said that, poor chap, he's kind of still waiting to get back into restaurants again because of COVID. But I'm sure he will. He's just the maestro.
Yeah, indeed he is. I think I've sort of used him as like my godfather.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, a lot of people in the hospitality industry do.
Oh, thanks, Nick. That's great.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Nick, you say about a smile on your face. Our son worked for a while before he went off to uni in America, I think in Starbucks, that's right. And he said one of the most difficult things was to always have a smile on your face when actually you were going to work feeling really pretty awful. You had to carry on and look happy for the customer. So it's not as easy as I know.
It's not as easy, and it's why I think the profession attracts so many actors, because you know it's not just the hours they work, but the fact that they can put a smile on their face even though they're feeling dreadful and would rather not be at work.
That's what Pete said.
Makes them good waiting staff.
We also learned from our son not to order decaffeinated coffee.
Oh, really?
Can't be bothered making decaf, but they hadn't run out. They just fob you off with coffee. But that was a long time ago in America, so I'm sure it's all different today. I think people are more discerning now. Any other questions? Anyone else want to? Yeah, Ros. We've got Ros Abrams and then Helen Naftalin. So first, Ros, if you'd unmute yourself, please. Ros, can you unmute yourself? No, Ros, sorry, we can't hear you. No?
Hello,
Yeah.
Perfect.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Well, I have a lot of memories from the middle 60s. We used to go to town, and for not a lot of money, we'd taken a theatre and a restaurant. Quo Vadis, the Ivy, the Gay Hussar, the Caprice, the Connaught. I have a Connaught story. I went there in the 60s in a pair of trousers. We took some Americans. I was told I could not come in wearing a pair of trousers. These Americans were staying in a hotel, so I borrowed a skirt and went back. And also, I don't know if you know this famous restaurant, Nick. It's just number 2. It's just by the Bank of England. A very, very well-known restaurant. And I went to the Prince of Wales Drawing School, and we all went there, 16 of us, into the restaurant. We stood in little corners and started drawing the cooks and chefs and everyone. And we were given little samples. But what was interesting, that when at 12:30, everything stopped, everything was ready, cleaned, and no sort of going on cooking and swearing. And they had a bain-marie, to keep things in. To keep the food hot. And then within 2 hours, they were very, very busy. And the chef who owned the place said, oh, for the days before Margaret Thatcher, they'd roll in at 1 and leave at 5. But I have lots of lovely memories. And it used to be very, very quiet, the restaurants then. They're very, very noisy now, aren't they? So difficult to hear the conversation. No, it was lovely hearing you, and it brought back a lot of memories for me. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Ros. That was lovely. I think Helen left. Yeah, Helen.
Hi, hello. I'm afraid I missed the beginning of your talk because I was held up on a telephone call downstairs. But what I have heard has been most interesting. Thank you very much. I remember when I was about 20 being taken to L'Escargot, and it really was thought to be the most premier restaurant in all of London. It was a single date. I was taken in an Aston Martin, and I'll never forget the evening. So thank you very much for that. I just wondered if you could suggest what food trends you predict we might be seeing in the future. I mean, English food had a very bad reputation for so many years, and now we have such a wonderful choice and so much fusion food and different styles of food. As far as kosher food, just coming up to that, there's been a proliferation of Israeli-run restaurants, which some of our congregation may have gone to and have become very popular. So I don't know if that maybe is a trend that we've been enjoying and may continue. But I wondered if you could predict any other trends out there.
I think the biggest trend is it's not new, it's not original, but I think its time has come really, and because of politics, and that is how chefs cook fish, because I think there's going to be a lot more fish available in the UK because of Brexit. And I think it's up to the chefs themselves to take advantage of it and to show it off. And I think everybody enjoys fish. Most chefs think that it's the best mechanism to show off their skills, you know. And so I think that fish per se, how it's treated, will be actually a really interesting future trend. I'm delighted to say for all the audience, most of whom are fish eaters, I would imagine.
Can I? Yes, I was just going to say, actually, interesting hearing Ros's story on the Connaught, because I also have a memory that when myself and my wife Gabrielle, we first came to London, at that time, it was really good value to go to all the top hotels for breakfast, at a time when you couldn't really afford to go for dinner. So we worked our way through the various hotels like Claridge's and Savoy for breakfast. And the only place we ever got refused entry was also the Connaught, because I wasn't wearing a tie. Yeah. So it was a bit similar to Ros's story. So I'd just like to give one piece of advice before we sort of wrap up. And that
We're not wrapping, Johnny, we've got more questions.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then let's... Yeah.
I think David Lawson wanted to ask a question. Yeah. Unless you and Nick are in a rush to get off somewhere.
No.
I assume you're not going anywhere. Do you mind if we get, David?
No.
Well, Nick, thank you and Johnny, thank you very much for a great afternoon. You have concentrated in your talk on, I suppose, the upper end of the restaurant scene. Not mentioned ethnic restaurants at all, that seem to be becoming very much more common. Have you any views, comments?
No, I mean, restaurants, it's just that hospitality is the easiest way and possibly the least expensive way for an ethnic couple or husband and wife, whatever, to establish a business. And, you know, how they start, they need very little capital. They have all the recipes. They need a commercial cooker, possibly a license. There are often places available quite cheap, and off they go. And, you know, I think in the roundabout way that restaurants come, go, come, go. There will always be ethnic restaurants. And I'm jolly grateful for them. You know, I love them. So I think what we've been talking about applies equally to them. It's just that I don't have the first-hand experience of either being from an ethnic minority other than Jewish, or having run anything other than l'escargot.
Have a look, see if anybody else.
There was one other thing I wanted to ask you, Nick, and that is, given your issues around your own health and your gut, how was it then being a restaurant reviewer in terms of what you could eat and what you couldn't eat, in terms of, you know, when you went in and had to decide?
There were certain things I'd avoid, but not that, because the restaurant has quite an extensive menu. I'd always find something that I could eat. It's more challenging now with this proclivity of chefs to have set menus, and, you know, no choice. But I can usually work a way around it. And there's always the wine list.
Sorry, I think we've got a few more. Helen again. Helen?
Yeah, another question. There was a suggestion a little while ago that restaurants might put calories on their dishes. And I thought, if I was going out for a meal, I want to relax and enjoy and not feel guilty about what I'm eating. But that's personal. What do you feel about restaurants that put a calorie count on their
Complete nonsense. Couldn't agree with you more, I'm afraid, Helen. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Irene, did you want to say something again?
No, I just wanted to ask, we've all seen the dreadful goings on in Ramsay's kitchens. Is that what really happens in a kitchen?
No, there's no drama in a professional kitchen. It is terribly quiet. Most kitchens, the cooks will operate, or many of them will operate with a timer, because their cooking is so precise that the meat goes into the oven, the timer goes on, the fish goes into a steamer, the timer goes on. How you're supposed to hear these timers if everybody's shouting and swearing, as Ramsay would have us believe, I've no idea. But there'd be no drama, and there'd be no footage, and there'd be no television series, and there'd be no Ramsay, which might be a good thing.
Yeah, I think everybody's... Oh yeah, Michael wanted to make a comment, sorry.
Hi. Your story about, no, it was, whose story was it about not wearing the trousers? Janet and I went into a restaurant in at the Colony Club in Florida. We got a babysitter for the night, and I hadn't taken a jacket to Florida with me in August. So we were into the restaurant, and we were shown to a table a long way from the ocean. And I asked the maitre d', can we sit by the ocean? And he said, well, no, you see, we have a dress code, really. You should really be here in a jacket. So I said, well, we've come with the kids to Florida to stay at this place. Why did I need a jacket? He says, don't worry, sir. You see that rail over there, coat hangers? Just take one of those jackets and put them on. They were all far too big. So I said to him, I'm sorry, it's far too big. He says, oh, don't worry, sir. Just put it over your arm, walk to your table, put it round your chair, and you've complied with the dress code.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think everybody... Ross, you had it. No, I thought Ross had a hand. I think everybody who's wanted to ask. Stephen Gold. Stephen.
No.
Stephen?
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for your talk. I enjoyed every minute of it. You were saying quite rightly before that restaurants have become much more casual than they were in days of yore. But one thing that hasn't changed is the most feudal custom of all, which is giving the staff a tip. And it's moved from being discretionary to something where, well, for example, in New York, as you'll know, if you don't pay 20%,
you get tips on the way out.
You're on severe risk of being part of the casserole.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether you think that whether is tipping just part of the whole experience and is best left as it is, or whether you have an argument for incorporating it in the price and everybody.
I think it ought to be incorporated in the price. I think 20% is far too high. I think it should be 15% incorporated in the price, and that's the end of it. But I've been saying this for 25 years, and nobody seems to listen. I think it's one of those issues that unless it's enacted in a law of Parliament, by law, it will never be adopted by the hospitality industry. And the chances of it getting adopted through this Parliament are pretty slim, I would have thought. So I think we'll be talking about this in 10 years' time, I'm afraid to say.
In your experience, do tips go to the staff most of the time?
Yes, all the time. I mean, in my experience, I think staff retention is so important for a restaurant. The fact that you can train people who recognize your regular customers, who know what they want, who make them welcome. It's so important that you keep the same staff, that you have to pay them properly. And paying them properly includes giving them all the fair share of their tips.
Okay, Johnny, I think that covers everybody who wanted to say something. I think, Nick, you've surpassed yourself. I think we've had loads of questions.
Well, a very good invigilator.
Well, I just wanted to tell people, if ever you, advice for your kids, if you're going to sit next to, pick your best friend early on who you think is going to be going into the restaurant world, or a crit who might need to have a friend come along to go and try a new restaurant. I've done many of those with Nick, which has been great fun. I missed it, obviously, when Nick stopped being the consultant at Glyndebourne, which he never consulted me about, but there were some wonderful moments, and to have had this opportunity today to share with everybody else what a rich and wonderful life Nick has had and still has in the restaurant world has been a great pleasure. So I'd like to thank Nick on behalf of everybody, unless that's for you to do, Janet.
Yeah, well, I'll do a bit of a thank you as well. It's okay.
Well, I'll let Janet do the thing.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to thank both of you. I mean, it's been truly amazing. And I remember your mum and dad, Nick, so it's interesting that it does all go back to our mums and dads and the Jewish thing about eating. Because really, in the days when you started up, it wasn't the thing for a Jewish boy to go and sell wine and open a restaurant. So it was something very different, and it's fantastic that you've been so successful and that you've got such wonderful stories to tell. I particularly love the story about the Mick Jagger cup, because I have been to every single Mick, as a child of the 60s, I have a friend who's been to every single Mick Jagger concert. If she was here now, I'm sure she would have gone off with more than this. So yeah, it's been very, you've taken us through the passage of time, through the changes, and finally, I would agree with you about what you say about serving the right coffee, because I'm a real coffee snob, and we go for coffee many a morning now, sitting on a bench outside, but we have a walk, and rather than take our flask of coffee, we feel liberated that we can actually have a coffee.
Yeah, well, coffee and tea are every customer's last memories of a place, and so much can be ruined by.
Absolutely. If they can't get that right, then you think, what else? What can they get right? So so it's been absolutely really wonderful. Had a wonderful afternoon, and we hope you'll come back, maybe in person, when we can all get together in person. We'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to ask everybody. Oh yes, and before we go, everybody, we've got next week. We're not having our regular. It's next week, isn't it? Yeah, our regular Wednesday session. We thought because of Pesach, but in fact it's our daughter Anna, who is going to speak to us about, she's a consultant in infectious diseases, and she's going to speak to us about COVID and the vaccine trials. You'll all get details, but please, everybody note that this is going to be on Tuesday evening, not during the day, and at 7:30. So hopefully you'll all be able to come. So I can ask you all to unmute yourselves and perhaps give Johnny and Nick a big round of applause and many thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Johnny. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks.
Many thanks. Thanks for everybody.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Nick, thanks for coming all that way.
Yeah, and Johnny. Thanks, Johnny. It's been great. Splendid.
Um,
And me.